In 2025, the countryside is going to get competitive. Before the new year, our business association had people come from the county government asking us to go back home and start businesses or invest. Then, when I went home for the holidays, our village secretary was also looking into this, trying to gather information on anyone doing business outside the village. The current policy is about revitalising the countryside and encouraging young people to go back and start their own businesses. Because in the city right now, 95% of businesses are losing money. Only a very small number of businesses are making a profit, Most people are losing money, and the city is already too competitive. But what can you do in the village?
In recent years, China's economy has struggled, with many industries in decline. This vlogger noted that competition is no longer just in cities, it has reached rural areas. As unemployment rises among university graduates, the Chinese government has urged them to return home and start businesses. Many who felt they had no opportunities in cities are now trying to invest in rural areas. One TikToker advised caution when it comes to investing and starting a business in the countryside. He pointed out that many well-known brands are opening stores in third and fourth tier cities, with prices not much lower than in major cities. Some products, including those targeting niche markets, are priced the same as in first-tier cities, which is surprising. With the large cities' market saturated, some brands with financial and supply advantages are expanding into smaller cities. People in rural areas or towns should be cautious with their spending and investments. Another TikToker shared that as more city entrepreneurs move to rural areas, they are transplanting their city business models, which has led to increased competition. For example, 2 years ago, a milk tea shop in his town was very popular, but it didn't last a year. Then another milk tea shop opened just 200 meters away, followed by another 500 to 600 meters farther. Over time, many businesses couldn't survive and started closing down. Now, the result is a situation where everyone loses. In 2025, is it the right time for young people to return to the countryside and start a business? A longtime fan visited me 2 days ago and said he plans to return and start a business. We talked about it for a while. So is returning and starting a business really feasible? As an entrepreneur who's been back for 4 years, I'd like to share my journey and offer some insights. I call myself a new farmer. In these 4 years, I've done a lot, and many followers have seen it. The most significant thing I did was create my own media account and personal brand. Over 4 years, I gained around 600,000 followers across platforms. This fan base gives me confidence in pursuing other projects. He said that making short videos on social media is essential for young entrepreneurs returning to the countryside. However, he warned that most won't succeed and will eventually return to the city for work.
As for this idea of going back to our hometown to start a business, personally, I think raising cattle doesn't work, raising pigs doesn't work, and raising chickens even less so. We don't know how to do that. I think going back to the village to make short videos, really, this is definitely doable.
She said her father's flour grinding business in the countryside was slow at first, but after she made a video, people drove over 100 kilometers to visit him. Now, short videos in rural areas attract a lot of attention. I invested over 200,000 yuan in an arcade up in the mountains, but today, I'm announcing its closure. It lasted 2.5 years, with a total investment of 213,540 yuan. Today, I want to share the lesson of losing over 200,000 yuan and advise young people not to start a business recklessly. This TikToker says starting a business in the countryside is extremely difficult. His expenses include 5,300 yuan for utilities, 36,000 yuan for equipment and labor, 93,000 yuan for construction, 32,000 yuan for road work, and nearly 30,000 yuan in other costs. Yet he still can't operate normally. When I started this project, I already had over 300,000 followers across all my websites. Each video had 50 to 60,000 views. If the arcade had been able to run, I wouldn't have lacked visitors. People would have come. You might wonder, how could this work in a small village? With that much traffic, even if only 7 or 8 people came daily for team building or a meal, I wouldn't have lost money, but I couldn't make it work. Starting a business in the countryside isn't as simple as it seems. He explained that the reason he couldn't start his business was due to a lack of strong connections. In rural areas, it's difficult to obtain both a fire safety permit and a business license. He hadn't anticipated these issues, assuming that once the equipment was purchased, he could begin operations. However, when he tried to open, he encountered numerous challenges. He said that in the mountains, if a fire had occurred, it would be hard to find anyone responsible. Therefore, having fire safety measures in place is crucial, and a business license is also necessary to operate. These two obstacles ultimately led to his failure. Other people have commented on the issue as well. The Henan University Student Entrepreneurship Park was just starting to show promise when the deputy county chief led a team to tear it down. Someone here made $1 million in the city, came back to start a business, lost everything in a year, and is now deep in debt. They've gone back to working in the city. Starting a business in the countryside, growing crops, what kind of profit can you make? Every industry is saturated. Making money is tough. Guaranteed you'll lose everything. It's a trap. Starting a business, without money, it's pointless. The Chinese government's so-called New Rural Construction has focused on stability and ideological control rather than prosperity. The Jiangsu chained woman case involving human trafficking and abuse is just the tip of the iceberg. After Xi Jinping took office, the 2021 Central No. 1 document promoted rural revitalisation, agricultural modernization, and the so-called rural toilet revolution. Experts noted that 7 trillion yuan was invested, but the toilet revolution was exposed for poor quality and rejection by villagers, turning into a showpiece. Over the past 2 years, it has largely been abandoned. He said that the Chinese government has invested 7 trillion yuan in new rural construction for several reasons. First, after stimulating the real estate market, the wealthy have been drained of resources, and the real estate sector has entered a deep slump. Second, consumer spending has stalled. Third, since Trump's tariffs, foreign trade has been affected. On one side, over 10 million university graduates need jobs every year, while on the other, people's purchasing power has been exhausted. The core idea behind new rural construction is to encourage wealthy city dwellers used to the urban lifestyle to move to rural areas where there is land, water, and space for livestock. The money they keep in the bank remains unused, so they are encouraged to invest in rural housing. Towns offer policies to promote land use, allowing the wealthy to fund villas in the countryside. University graduates design these villas, and migrant workers build them using surplus materials. The local rural population can also serve the wealthy, earning some income. This is how the so-called new rural construction, costing 7 trillion yuan, has come about. Meanwhile, farmers' land is taken by the wealthy, and they are pushed into the cities. An integration zone is expected to emerge between cities and towns.
We all know the countryside is hollowed out. Most of the people living in the village are left behind elderly or elderly who live alone. Others are from poor households, the ones who can't afford to buy a house. So why do some government officials still want to stay in the countryside? I'll say it, and if some people get upset, that's on them. The town is just a transitional place for you, but the countryside can still produce results, and it's easy to exploit and get promoted. Look at what you people do every day. Every year, you just clean up a bit, paint the white walls, sell insurance, shout slogans, encourage farmers to get rich, hold industry revitalisation meetings, take some photos, or even put on a show to act like you're doing something. The officials talk about cultural revitalisation, but they don't actually do anything important. It's clearly a rural area, but they insist on managing it like a city, turning what used to be thriving rural industries into professional farmers. Farmers can't even raise a few chickens, ducks, or pigs, plant some vegetables or melons. Isn't this nonsense? They've destroyed a rural society that has maintained the excellent civilization of the Chinese nation for thousands of years. Instead, they've created even bigger problems for farmers. The village is empty, there's no industry, and it's becoming a hollow shell. Yet they keep shouting about rural revitalisation. This society, is it not strange?
The TikToker mentioned that every year, the village becomes quieter during the new year. Fewer people walk the streets, and even the sound of barking dogs is becoming rare. It feels like the northern countryside has hit the pause button. The loudspeakers in the village are silent and no longer serve a purpose. 20 years ago, the village was full of people, especially children. Today, it's very different. 2 decades ago, most people farmed, some worked in the cities, and everyone aimed at earning money. buy a house, and provide a home for their children. Now, those who wanted to buy a house have already done so. He checked the data and found that the average age of the permanent population in rural northeast China is 57, with less than 8% born after the 1990s. This suggests that once the elderly pass, at least 30% of northern villages will be deserted. Developers in cities are no longer optimistic. Last year, the number of newborns in provincial capitals was less than a fraction of what it was 20 years ago. Selling 30% of new housing units is now considered a success. The TikToker said that those who should have moved to the city have already done so. What remains are elderly people who can't move and young people who can't afford a down payment. Even more concerning is that young people aren't even willing to marry. Looking ahead, a 50-year-old rural person will be 70 in 20 years. After they pass, the land and old houses will remain, but no one will want them, and they won't be able to sell them. It's uncertain if the children of city-dwelling young people will return to inherit these properties. Once the last of a village's guardians leave, it won't just be old houses that are lost, but the memory of thousands of years of agricultural history. Why can't the countryside be revitalized? The once popular rice paddies on the mountain project, which cost billions, is now a ruin. What did the farmers gain? Why hasn't rural revitalization worked? There are too many superficial projects focused on appearances. The ones who made money were the developers and land leasers, who took subsidies meant for revitalization. Those billions of yuan went into a few pockets, and farmers had little involvement. In Guizhou's mountains, a rice paddy project, funded with hundreds of millions, made money for developers and decision makers, but not for farmers. Despite being under strict control by the CCP, rural areas in China continue to face increasing intrusion from the regime, further limiting their already constrained living conditions. At the end of last year, the state-owned China Railway 14th Bureau took on a project in Shandong, acquiring 15,000 acres of land to grow crops like corn, wheat, and rice, while forming a professional team of nearly 100 people. This sparked controversy, with some saying, large state-owned enterprises with abundant resources are taking away the livelihoods of ordinary people. Are farmers supposed to work in cities now? They've lost even basic protections. David Huang, an economist, pointed out that although CCP documents emphasize protecting farmers' rights to information, participation, and benefits in high-standard farmland projects, these measures are ineffective in practice, much like other rights guaranteed by the Constitution. Once farmers lose their land, their future livelihoods will be at risk. Last year, the Chinese authorities announced plans to urbanize a large portion of the rural population over the next 5 years, including relaxing city residency restrictions and addressing farmers' voluntary and compensated withdrawal from their land use rights, drawing attention. China expert Yue Shan believes a household registration system established during the Mao era created a dual urban-rural system. He argued that due to the economic downturn caused by the 3 years of pandemic lockdowns, heavy spending, and money diplomacy, China's economy has been drained. Now, the regime seeks new economic growth drivers, hoping to lure farmers into cities to boost urban economies. It's important to note that due to the CCP's dual urban-rural system, migrant workers, the largest group affected by unemployment, are not included in official urban unemployment statistics, which are based on urban surveys.